Good morning, Kris. Kris, you took over the reins of Infosys at a time when the whole sector was on a decade-long dream run of fabulous growth, great productivity and great positive vibe around the whole sector, and especially Infosys as a really bellwether, stock within the IT sector. And during, the period when you were leading the company, you saw nature of different crises, starting with the economic downturn in 2008, nature of competition changing both from the domestic side as well as multinationals getting their act together, as well as for the first time rising inflation in the domestic costs for the IT industry. Now, when you look back at this period, how does this volatility and nature of different challenges impacted the firm, and the more importantly, do you see that as a one-time blip in an economic cycle, or is this the new normal?
So the period I was there as CEO, the 4 years, saw quite a bit of volatility. In September of 2008, the world turned upside down. The middle of that, around September 15th, is when the whole Lehman crisis happened. So that kind of started the whole downturn, and it was actually a very, very sudden event. In fact, the September 1st week, there was a hope that the crisis would not indeed happen and things would actually play out properly. But then that 1 week, everything changed. Is this a signal of things that are going to happen this century? To some extent, I believe so. The pace of change, the velocity of change has increased dramatically with technology changing rapidly. In a globalized environment, anything that happens at any part of the world impacts all other parts of the world, and any business that is global, we will see the impact very quickly. We have had significant natural catastrophes. We have had, of course, the financial crisis, and we have had events like the Arab Spring. So every one of these will have repercussions for businesses, and I expect that the 21st century will be a period of volatility and dramatic ups and downs.
Now, within So, Kris, in the context of this global uncertainty, if you look at Infosys as a company, before the crisis, if you looked at the starting point, bulk of our revenues came from North America and Europe. A large part of our revenues were dependent on banking, financial services, and insurance sectors. And in that context, each of these, both in terms of geographies as well as sectors, went through a very big turbulent period. From an economic perspective, but also nature of players, their own strengths in their respective sectors. When you look at now Infosys' journey over these 4 years, and as you look beyond, what kind of steps did you take to navigate in this period of uncertainty in terms of your core geographic markets, in terms of core verticals, and did you think about rebalancing the portfolio, either in terms of geographic footprint, the kind of products and services you go after, or the verticals?
So de-risking has been part of the capability that we had built in the organization way back from early 2000. We have a risk council and a risk committee of the board. The risk council actually looks at several external parameters and produces a report once in 2 weeks. No sector, no customer, especially no customer, we said should not be more than 10% of our revenues. Today the largest customer is about 4.5% of our revenues. So we have looked at several parameters like these and clearly articulated the thresholds which will trigger corrective action by the company. With respect to geographies, with respect to industry sectors, etc., given that the world is shifting east, shifting to Asia, we have a medium to long term strategy of balancing our portfolio. Today about 63% of our revenues come from North America, about 23% from Europe, and rest of the world is about 12 to 13%. We said that over time we should move to a 40-40-20 breakup of our revenues, 40 from North America, 40 from Europe, and 20 from rest of the world. Europe and US actually are similar in size of GDP. So that's the reason why we said 40-40-20. With respect to industry segments, we said we should look at new industry segments like healthcare, utilities, government services, which are counter-cyclical to how the market moves. So financial services, high tech, etc., actually moves with the market and typically are volatile, whereas utilities, healthcare, public services are more, they don't grow fast, but they don't also decline fast. They are counter-cyclical to the market. But these things take time. They will not yield results in the very short term. In the short term, you have to look at how you can actually bring your costs under control. As the revenue declines, how can you bring the costs under control, and what capabilities that you need to build in order to make that happen. If I look back, in the financial year 2008, we had a revenue of about 35%. Then we came down to 11%, 3%, and went back to 26%. So the revenue dropped significantly, very dramatically during the downturn, and you have to bring the cost in control so that your profitability is affected as little as possible. You also need to, of course, recruit, manage your employees during the downturn, and forecasting it becomes extremely important. Having the ability to control costs and having the ability to forecast are the two things that you need in order to react very quickly during a downturn.
So Kris, couple of these things, I would like to probe deeper. So you spoke about, very tight risk management processes, going all the way up to the board level to gain, transparency and visibility on that. Would you like to share with us, what kind of specific risks that you track, and has that process, given new learnings, through this turbulence phases in terms of, some new areas that you started looking at more carefully?
So given that the crisis was a crisis in the financial sector, and given that about 35% of our revenues come from the financial services sector, we started focusing on individual companies in the financial services sector. We said that we must look at the CDS spreads, because that gives a clear indication of the company itself. Several of our customers, a handful of our customers actually got bought out during the period. So M&A activities increased during the period, and we need to manage these things properly. Some of the companies actually declared bankruptcies also. So we have to figure out, would our ability to collect on our invoices, on our billing, be impacted during the downturn. So one of the things we institutionalized at that point was review of the financial status or the financial indicators of our clients, and based on that we increased our focus on accounts receivables and accounts receivable collections. So that risk metric actually became number one priority during the downturn. So you have to, based on the circumstances, you have to change the priority of your risk matrices.
Chris, the other two important points that you mentioned when you talked about managing or navigating through a crisis, you talked about control over costs and the ability to forecast. One is control over cost, and the other is building an element of flexibility into the cost model while going through the period of great volatility in terms of the growth that you were going through. Would you like to share your experiences on these two dimensions?
About 60% of our costs are people costs. Out of that, about 40% is out of the 60%, 20% is costs typically in India and 40% are costs outside India. The 40% of the costs are directly dependent on volume and directly dependent on growth. So it's the 20% that is fixed in some sense. And within that, we have actually increased the variability significantly. At the senior most levels, the variability is almost 100%. That means if a person gets X, the bonus component is also X actually, and that then gets adjusted based on the performance of the company. So we have ensured that from a cost perspective, there are significant levers available for us to reduce when a crisis happens, when the company does not do well. Now, having said that, we had a quarter where we grew almost 6%, and then we were looking at the next quarter, where that is the second quarter of a financial year, the quarter ending September 30th, we grew almost 6%. It was one of the best quarters actually. And then the next quarter we were projecting a decline in growth, and for the entire year, at the beginning of the year we had projected, if I remember right, about 20+% growth, but we ended the year with about 11% growth actually. So we had to reduce our guidance, which means that this cost control is not sufficient. We have to look at some other means of cost control. We had made 16,000 offers in campuses because we had projected more than 20% growth. So we had actually given 16,000 offers in campuses, and we decided that we will actually request those people to join the company, because the company's long-term brand in campus is very, very important. These people had not done anything wrong. The problems were not created by these employees. The problems were created by external factors, and we said that we will request the people to join the company. We extended the training for 6 months. What our existing employees did was, we all went without an increment, without promotions in the next cycle of salary revision. So there was no salary revision, no promotion, and with that we were able to manage the cost. Of course, the future recruitment numbers were moderated or toned down because the growth was coming down. One important factor is that on September 15th we realized that things are not going to be as good as we expected. We knew that for the first time the company will have to revise the guidance downwards. So we quickly polled all our clients. We talked to all the client facing, the sales people, revalidated our forecast, reduced the guidance number, and published a revised guidance on October 2nd week actually. And we were able to do that very fast because of the systems that we had for forecasting.
Chris, on this part, you talked about the Infosys' ability to quickly adapt in terms of, as soon as we saw some changes, we were able to forecast, saying, okay, now this is going to be my expectations, which are a change from here. How does that process work? How do you, at what frequency, what kind of tools do you use to make sure that you're always looking at the reality rather than living in a world created in the past. So how do you navigate that?
So typically at the end of the quarter, we poll our clients, and we get their revised budgets, revised estimate of spending on IT, and then we validate it using our own client facing people. We validate it from analyst projections, both financial analysts as well as technology analysts, their own projections of how the spending will look like, and then we combine all these things to create a company forecast. And that is why we keep saying that our guidance is a statement of fact. It is built on a model that we have created and fine tuned over the years. Now what we did in September was actually we went back to the clients immediately. We actually talked to 3-4 people within the client organization to get a better feel for what they see their numbers are going to look like, and we toned it down. We erred on the side of caution because we knew that the clients would take some time to react to the situation, because immediate reaction will be disbelief actually, that it may not be as bad as what people would think. So we actually erred on the side of caution, and we were able to come out with the right forecast for the rest of the year.
So once you shared your prognosis of the market internally in the organization, what systems and processes do you use to ensure that the guidance that the management has in mind, all the actions on ground are consistent with that, both in terms of cost control but also in terms of risk management? So how do you ensure that your top management decisions then percolate down into ground level actions?
Our planning cycle is annual. We create an annual budget, but then every quarter the budget is revalidated, and we estimate the budget again or come out with a new budget. Because of that, we were able to, because we toned down the revenue, we actually figured out what costs we need to cut. And then we said that okay, we can look at discretionary spending, and that is where we will focus our attention immediately. Since we had most of the expenses controlled through systems, all we had to do was go in and change the systems such that we brought some of those expenses immediately under control. So for example, travel requisition, we put an extra step in the travel requisition. If it was not project related, it will require an additional step of approval. So immediately our travel costs came down. Similarly, of course, we can recompute the bonuses, because a significant part of a person's compensation is variable. So we can recompute the bonus. So we revised the budgets for the company. We split it by the different departments and business units, and gave them all the revised budget, and then they were required to actually manage their expenses to be within that budget. The systems are such that any time an expense goes beyond the budgeted amount, the transaction will not be passed. So we had very tight systems control on every expense line item, and because of that, we could immediately bring the cost under control. We were able to, even during this downturn, we were able to sustain our margins because we brought our costs under control. Of course, our employees also helped, because they forego, they did not take a compensation increase in that cycle.
The other part about going through a choppy period is, while navigating through these choppy waters, how do you retain the organization's focus on building capabilities for future, be it in terms of building non-linear parts of the business, so to enable future growth, not to lose sight of that, be it around building new capabilities. So while navigating through these rough periods, how did you achieve that balance, and what were the trade-offs that you had to sort of keep in mind on that?
So there were two things that we needed to do. The first is make sure that your costs are in line with the revised projections. You've revised your growth projections for the next 2-3 years, and after doing that, then you relook at the environment and figure out what you need to do for the medium to long term. So we said that in the medium to long term, we need to look at balancing our geographical footprint. Medium to long term, we need to look at industry sectors which are counter cyclical and invest in those sectors such that we start earning revenues in those sectors. We also said that we need to look at revenues from intellectual property, solutions, products, etc., because that also acts as a cushion to revenue coming just from services alone. We also saw that trends like mobile computing, cloud technology are all starting to take off. So we had to respond to those also. So after we were comfortable that we had a handle on the new projections for the business, we started focusing on revising our strategy. We came out with what we call today Infosys 3.0, which looks at how the revenue will be geographically split, how the revenue will be split across the industry sectors, what kind of new structures that we need to meet the strategic requirements, and restructured the company based on Infosys 3.0 requirements. So this was done during this period, and as the growth picked up, as we were ready to launch it, of course the growth also picked up.
Another part of sort of managing these periods is around the style of leadership you have to adopt, to manage manage the firm in this turbulent period. As a founder CEO of the company, I think a couple of questions. One, your own learnings of having been through that period of what works in terms of leadership style and what doesn't. And second, as a personal question, as a founder, does it help to take certain tough calls, or does it make it tougher, during these periods of volatility? So how was your experience around that?
See, first and foremost, the style of leadership at Infosys is leadership by example. So I talked about giving up bonuses, giving up increments, etc. We made sure that the biggest cut was taken at the top. We took no bonus at that in that quarter, whereas at the lowest level the bonus cut was about 10% or 15%. So we made sure that the biggest cuts were taken at the senior most level, and we clearly demonstrated that there is leadership at the top. Second, in today's world, you have to have a very close watch on external events and what happens outside. We need to look at the implications of those events in a manner in which we can respond very quickly, and you need to have the ability to control costs very quickly. You need to have the systems, the processes, the mechanisms to immediately take control of the situation. And third, you need to make sure that as soon as you see signs of improvement, you need to actually demonstrate that the company is willing to now show that things are improving. So normally we give revisions in April, but as soon as we saw signs of improvement, we gave actually an increment in October. So April there was no increment, but in October we actually gave increments that year to show that things are actually improving, because we need to create a sense of optimism within the workforce. So listening, ability to take control of the situation, ability to manage the transition, ability to show that things are improving as and when it improves, leadership by example. Those are some of the things a leader must demonstrate, must show in these periods of volatility and crisis.
Yes, two important points that you mentioned, while dealing with the employees. You talked about the fact that you were transparent in sharing that messages with the wider employee base, and they help you actually, manage the cost base, during this period. At the same time, being nimble enough, to share the positive news back and change course. So during this period of, volatility, where you're sharing a sense of caution and a sense of being realistic about the world, at the same time retaining motivation, retaining certain aggression when it comes to the market. So how do you engage, with people? And Infosys is one of the largest employers in India. So how do you maintain that balance of keeping the workforce energized and keeping them part of this journey?
So one of the ways we engage the employees is actually we asked every employee to come up with a suggestion to cut costs. We said that if each of the employees can cut $10 of cost, if we look at a workforce of 100,000 people, we're really talking about $1 million of costs saved actually. And we got actually lot of suggestions on ways in which we can cut costs. So that actually got them engaged in a positive manner where they felt that they are part of the solution. Similarly, I talked about leadership by example, where we took the maximum cut at the senior most level. We took no bonus at that point, no increment, and that also demonstrated that we are there with the employees. We are all together in making this happen. Of course, there was also an example of poor communication during this downturn, because we had launched a massive exercise of restructuring the careers during this period, what we called IRAs actually, and that happened simultaneously. And what happened was people then misunderstood the implications of no promotions as coming from IRAs actually. So we had to go back and communicate again, saying that the downturn was the cause and not IRAs was the cause of some of the changes. So we learned from that actually. We then engaged with managers. We told them what really was happening. We were transparent with them and got them to buy into what really was happening and what was the cause of the problem.
Another unique aspect of the last 4-year period was also that while managing this period, you were also preparing the the next generation of leadership, the planned transition to the next founder CEO, as well as preparing the next set of leaders, preparing for the next decade ahead, and having the organization pipeline and the leadership pipeline ready to take Infosys in the next decade. So during this period, how was that experience like of looking at that transition? So were you looking at as this broader leadership pool and co-opting them into the thought processes of actually using that as a training ground for the future leaders? How was that process like?
So leadership development is a part and parcel of any leader's responsibility, and we have created formal processes for leadership development. The Executive Council, which sits below the board, was formed in 2007 November actually, before the crisis started. And so during the crisis we actually engaged with them proactively. They were part and parcel of the decision making. So they actually got visibility into how the organization managed this downturn, which would have been an invaluable experience for any future leader of the company. See, during the crisis you have to take care of some short-term issues, but you also need to make sure that you keep your medium and long-term goals in front of you, and make sure that you are also taking appropriate steps to meet the medium and long-term requirements. So in the medium to long term, we need to figure out what should our strategy be based on the changes that are happening in the external environment. We had come out with Infosys 3.0. We also need to anticipate and figure out what leadership changes are. In August of 2011, we knew that Narayan Murthy is going to retire. There will be some changes in the board, and then in 2015 there will be some more changes. So we started planning the transitions in leadership. In 2011, of course, we inducted 3 more people, 3 more executives into the board, and clearly signaled that we are ready and we have the depth and we have the pipeline of leaders. The leaders were part and parcel of the decision making process during the downturn, and so they got in some sense on the job training of how to handle a crisis.
We started our conversation where you mentioned rightly so that be it economic uncertainty, be it uncertainty in the political world in many parts of today's world, as well as environmental challenges, it will be a reality of this century. Now as you look back at this period and sort of look at, if you were to advise other CEOs on what are the capabilities that organizations would need to develop to sustain and thrive in this new normal, what would your message be?
First and foremost, you must have very good listening capabilities, very good capabilities to gauge what really is happening in your marketplace. It's extremely important, and this translates into your ability to forecast your revenues. This is one of the most important capabilities an organization must have, because the revenues drive all the rest of the decisions that you make. So first and foremost, you need to be able to forecast your revenues, have control of your sales. Second, you must be able to control your cost very quickly, have systems and processes in place such that if you want to cut $1 of cost or 1% of cost, where will that come from without impacting the business in the medium to long term, without sacrificing the strategic advantage you want to sustain even during this downturn. Third, you need the capability to implement changes very quickly within the organization, and that of course needs the support of systems and processes. Fourth, you have to be decisive, you have to take decisions very quickly, and you have to be visible of being in control of the situation. So when a crisis happens, you go into a command and control mode immediately and lead the organization from the front. Next is the ability to actually look at the medium to long term, even during a downturn, and start planning what are the lessons to be learned and what will be your strategy for the future, what adjustments that you need to make during that. You need to take care of communicating. You need to make sure that all your employees understand what really is happening and go along with the changes that are happening. It's extremely important that their buy-in is there for the responses you need to implement very, very quickly. So those are some of the things I believe, some of the things that are required in a leader.